solving an absolute value inequality problem type 2. So at this point, you should have seen the problem type 1, and we talked about absolute value inequalities and learned that there are, in general, two things that happen. So off to the side here, if you have an absolute value is less than some positive number or less than or equal to, either way, let's use 8. This is where the number gets sandwiched on the inside between the positive version of this number, which right here, and the negative version of the number. And on the number line, the way that this ends up looking, -8, +8, it's just this area right between here. So if it's a less than sign, you sandwich it, and if it's a greater than sign, or greater than or equal to, either way, with positive numbers, this splits into two inequalities. So it's going to split into x is greater than or equal to +8, or x is less than or equal to -8. If this is looking unfamiliar to you, go ahead and check out the video for problem type 1, and I go into a lot more detail there. So here, same idea, we're going to fill in those circles, but it would be the tails instead. So that's what we talked about in a previous video, is that if it's a less than sign or less than or equal to, you sandwich, because one inequality is less than two inequalities. So if it's greater than, it's 2. If it's less than, it's one inequality with a sandwich. So that's where we left off in the last video. Looking at this guy over here, we have the absolute value of y minus 14 is less than -6. And you might be thinking to yourself, ooh, that's one of those weird situations where there's a negative. But with the absolute values, you have to get this whole absolute value by himself before you can make any judgments. So just like you were solving a regular inequality, I'm going to add the 14 to both sides so that these 14s cancel. I now have the absolute value of y is less than 8, which is actually coincidental. I wasn't thinking about that when I did this over here. All right, so the absolute value of y is now by itself, and we have a less than sign, less than 8. So if it's a less than, we are going to sandwich y between +8 and -8. And I will put -8 here, +8 here. There are no underlines on these inequalities, so we're going to do open circles, and then if it's sandwiched, that means it's that middle piece in there. The interval notation for this is going to be -8 to 8, so it's just going to be one piece. Now on ALEKS, for this particular topic, they're going to ask you to give your answer like this. They're not going to ask for the number line, and they're not going to ask for the interval. On the exam we will, which is why I'm asking you to do it in this video and to pay attention to that. But this right here is what they're going to want you to do on the actual topics themselves. So let's go ahead and take a look at another one. Here, we're trying to get this absolute value by himself. So this little 5 here, we need to take care of him before we can do anything else. I'm going to divide both sides by 5, just like I would if it were 5w without the absolute value. And now I have absolute value of 5 is greater than or equal to 1. If you have an absolute value that's greater than a positive number, this is where you split it into two different inequalities. So the greater than sign is splitting. You'll have w is greater than or equal to 1, which is exactly what this would be without the up and down lines. Or, and it's really important you put or, this topic is going to give you options for and or. You don't have to worry about the and, but the or part is important for the greater than sign. Or w, now flip the direction, less than or equal to the negative version of it, -1. So I'm making my number line. Here's -1, +1. If you have two inequalities, these are going to end up being the tail ends of your number line. I have underlines here, so that means I'm going to be doing closed circles and shading those tail ends. So over here, this is everything less than or equal to -1. Over here, this is everything greater than or equal to +1. For interval notation, this is going to go from -infinity to -1, bracket because we have closed circles, union +1 to infinity. So this is just taking both sides and combining them together with this union symbol, because we have to separate them since there is a blank spot in the middle there. All right, let's look here. Same idea, we need to isolate that absolute value, so we'll do minus 26 on both sides. We'll have the absolute value of v is less than negative 15. Less than negative 15. There were two rules with negative numbers and absolute value. If you have an absolute value less than a negative number, this is when there's going to be no solution, because absolute values give you positive numbers, and you can't have a positive number that's less than a negative number. If you have the absolute value is greater than a negative number, well, all positive numbers are greater than all negative numbers. So regardless of what's inside there, there's going to be infinitely many solutions. All real numbers are going to satisfy this. In this case, we have the less than sign, so we have an absolute value less than a negative, so that's going to be a no solution. For a no solution problem, there's no possible number line to draw. You don't have to worry about intervals. You would just say no solution. One last example here. Here, get the absolute value by itself again, just like we talked about. So I have the absolute value of w is greater than or equal to negative 7. And much like the last problem, here we have a negative number and an absolute value, which should make you stop. Don't do anything that we would normally do with an absolute value. Positive numbers are always greater than all the negative numbers. So here, this is going to be all real numbers as the solution. And those are the basics that you need to know for this topic. They're going to get a little more complicated as you go along, but I know you got this. You're doing a great job in the course. You've made it this far. Just keep chugging along. You're going to do fine, and I'll see you in another video.